What would you do if the person you loved most asked for permission to betray you, and then tried to call it empowerment? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most shocking stories of betrayal, manipulation, and revenge. This is not just about a marriage, it's about what happens when trust becomes a weapon. Stay with me until the end because the twist will leave you speechless. You're watching Cheating Stories 7. Don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this. Now, let's step into the drama of she demanded a hall pass, but my revenge made her lose everything. People often said Claire and I made marriage look effortless. At gatherings, friends raised their glasses and called us the steady ones, the couple who had cracked the code. Their envy felt like validation, and I believed them so deeply that it became my truth. Our love was my compass, the story I told myself each morning. I carried proof like relics. The photo of us on the floor of our first home, pizza boxes for plates, eyes shining with reckless certainty. The memory of her falling asleep on my shoulder mid-flight, our reflections overlapping in the window like two lives fused into one. In those moments, I thought loyalty alone could guarantee forever. Then came the word from her doctor, early stage. A warning disguised as grace. I cleared my calendar, cooking by recipe cards taped to the cabinets, sleeping in the hospital chair with one hand on her blanket as if touch alone could anchor her here. When she woke from anesthesia with that mischievous smile, the one that first drew me in, it felt like air itself grew lighter. We didn't speak of starting over, we didn't need to. Survival itself was a vow renewed, but recovery changed her. She came back brighter, hungrier, determined to devour life. No more half-living, she said, pulling me into her momentum. And I followed because what else was love but following? We booked Europe on impulse. In Lisbon, she stood on a hilltop, hair tangled by wind, whispering that she could feel time moving in her bones. In Belize, she floated in blue caverns and shouted that the ocean was her second chance. I memorized her echo, believing it was ours. But momentum became a flood. Yoga turned into sculpting, sculpting into lap swimming, Tuesdays into cooking lessons. Photos, classes, memberships. Her calendar was bursting, yet none of it had room for me. I kept playing the photographer, the planner, the man who smiled through exhaustion because I thought devotion meant never saying no. And then small cracks appeared. At dinners, she faced the room instead of me. At home, silence was drowned in playlists. She spoke of what she had almost lost with a tone that made me feel like the present tense of our marriage was up for renegotiation. Friends toasted her strength. Someone called me a saint. Claire raised her glass and declared she would never again be handcuffed by fear. Applause followed. I clapped too, even as a hollowness opened in my chest. Later, when I reached for her hand, it felt borrowed, like something she could take back at any moment. The first distance revealed itself in the kitchen. She glowed while praising a yoga instructor who finally understood alignment. She said we, but meant her classmates, a tiny word, a small shift, yet sometimes nothing is the seed of everything. Then came the fragments, a second water bottle, a sweater I'd never seen, notes about parties in cities I hadn't visited with her. And then Marcus, mentioned casually like background noise. I forced myself not to ask, because trust, once it calcifies into habit, feels easier than doubt. So I kept cooking, kept holding the camera, kept making space for her restlessness. But beneath it all, a truth whispered, sharp and undeniable. Love can outlast sickness. It can survive fear. But even the strongest love can wither from neglect. And I was the only one still trying to keep it alive. Recovery had given Claire a second chance, but what she built from it felt less like gratitude and more like escape. She wasn't just surviving, she was reinventing. And while I stood still, clutching the comfort of routine, she sprinted into a new version of herself as if the woman I had loved had been left behind on an operating table. She filled her days with momentum. Sunrise runs, rooftop dinners, strangers who became confidants in yoga studios or sculpting classes. Her phone buzzed with new names, new plans, new circles I wasn't part of. At first, I told myself it was natural. She had brushed too close to the edge of life. Of course, she wanted to taste every flavor, chase every horizon. But slowly, I realized she wasn't asking me to chase with her. She was running alone. At night, she spoke of freedom in a way that sounded like a warning. "Time's too short," she whispered, staring at the ceiling as though afraid the shadows might collapse in. "I won't waste another second." I nodded even as the words twisted inside me. Freedom for her meant flight. For me, it meant being left behind. Trips multiplied. She booked tickets with the casualness of buying groceries. Paris in spring, Barcelona in summer, a music festival in Montreal where she came home sunburned and glowing, carrying stories that didn't have room for me in them. She laughed louder in those stories than she did in our kitchen. She looked younger in the photos strangers tagged her in online than in the ones I had taken. When I tried to slow her to ask for one quiet weekend together, her eyes hardened, sharp with accusation. "Don't cage me," she said. The word echoed in me like a verdict. Cage, as though love itself had turned into a prison she was desperate to escape. And yet I kept pretending. I held the camera while she posed against graffiti walls in cities I barely knew. I packed her vitamins before flights and texted reminders to drink water in different time zones. I told myself this was devotion, not desperation, that following her at a distance was still a kind of love. But in the rare moments when the whirlwind paused, I caught glimpses of something darker. A new password she guarded fiercely. Late-night messages lit up her screen, names saved without surnames. She turned her body slightly away when replying, a small motion that spoke louder than words. When I asked, she smiled too quickly, the kind of smile that demanded trust while offering none in return. I started to feel like a ghost in my own marriage, present but unseen, supportive but excluded. At dinners, she spoke of adventures as if they belonged to a woman who happened to live in our house but no longer belonged to our life. Friends clapped and called her brave. I clapped too, though each cheer hollowed me further. One night, lying awake in the silence she had left behind, I wondered if survival had given her wings only to leave me stranded. Maybe the storm hadn't passed after all. Maybe it had just moved inside our walls, tearing at the foundation in ways no one else could see. Freedom or flight, that was the choice she kept making again and again. And the more she reached for freedom, the more I realized she was already gone. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that hides inside a calendar. Claire came home early, set her tote on the counter, and reached for the burgundy we were saving for a good day. 2 fingers into a glass, no question if I wanted one. She smiled like the conversation had already gone well. "I want to talk like adults," she said. "A hall pass, one night, clean." For a beat, the phrase meant school hallways and laminated cards. Then it clicked. "There's someone at work," she continued, swirling the glass. "Marcus Reed. He's leaving Friday, so no awkward Mondays, no gossip. It's an honest way to close a chapter I never opened, with you." I sat so the room would stop tilting. "You're asking me to agree to you sleeping with someone else." "I'm asking for your support," she corrected, soft as a seminar. "Boundaries, autonomy, reframing. If you say yes, it proves our marriage is strong enough for adult choices." Her new language arrived polished from yoga studios and HR podcasts, all stainless steel nouns you could eat off. "Is this a fantasy?" I asked. "Or a plan you've already made?" "A plan." She opened her laptop. "Farewell drinks downtown. I'll book a hotel after, text you when I leave so you're not worried. I'll spare you the details. It'll be clean, kind." Kind landed on my tongue like a pill I couldn't swallow. "I think you're chasing adrenaline." I said, "Sick, then better that whiplash rewires people. We could try grief counseling, name what changed, decide together if burning our vows is healing or just fire." She lifted a hand as if I'd asked a thoughtful question during a panel. "I've done the work," she said. "If you say no, that confirms what I'm afraid of: male insecurity, control." There it was, a velvet threat laid gently on the table. "Approval given under coercion isn't approval," I said. "You're asking me to bless what will hurt me, then blame me for bleeding." "I'm asking you to support my autonomy. One night, it won't touch who we are." "It's nothing," I said, "and it's everything." Both can be true, logistics unspooled like ribbon. A boutique hotel 3 blocks from the bar, discretion promised in its marketing copy. She'd put it on her card to keep accounting simple. She wouldn't tell me the room number because I would obsess. She'd answer anything I needed to know after. Before makes it too real for you, she said, almost tender. I'm protecting you from noise. The part of me that still lives in the hospital chair tried to speak. The man who learned recipes and touched a blanket through the night so a life would stay put. I asked the only practical question that felt decent to ask. Is Marcus married? She sighed, patient, superior. You're personalizing. This is about me. If you really see me, you'll let me do this. Let me. The phrasing sawed quietly through a load-bearing beam. I won't agree, I said. I won't stop you from leaving the house, but I won't pretend this is okay. And I won't remain while you recast betrayal as therapy. The air dried as if moisture had been wrung out of it. She set the glass down, leaving a perfect ring on the counter, and closed her laptop like a solved equation. I'm sorry to put such a big decision on your shoulders, she said, voice soft with practiced grace. So I'm taking it off. Consent under duress isn't consent. I'm going to do this, and I hope you'll be here when I get back. We stood in the domestic hum of the dishwasher, the kind of sound that pretends something important is being mended out of sight. She rinsed her glass, returned it to its place, and paused in the doorway like an actress hitting her light. I'll text when I leave the bar, she added, so you're not worried. When the apartment was quiet, I stared at the wine ring shining on the counter and rubbed it away with the heel of my hand until the circle vanished and the spot looked cleaner than the rest. I stood there long enough to feel the vertigo of her reasoning take shape. Devotion recast as control, boundaries recited like scripture, the word kindness emptied and used as packaging. If she had asked forgiveness after a mistake, I might have found a path. If she had asked for help naming what survival had done to her desires, I would have learned a new language. Instead, she asked for permission and called it support, announced an ultimatum and called it autonomy, scheduled a betrayal and called it kind. Down the hall, a zipper tested its teeth. A suitcase whispered shut. Okay, I said to no one, not agreement, not surrender. Just the sound a floor makes when it finally stops pretending it will hold. The days after that Tuesday carried a strange shine, like the apartment had been polished for a scene I hadn't agreed to. Claire moved lightly, the way people do when a decision has already been made. Morning tears over coffee, life is short, life is a thief. Noon gratitude texts about sunlight on the river. Evening lectures on mortality, spoken in a tone so serene it felt rehearsed. Freedom, she said, had saved her. Fear had almost killed her. I should be proud she was brave enough to live. When I gently asked what our vows meant inside a courage that required hotel keys, she called me dramatic. When I said her one night was a match held to dry timber, she accused me of preferring her fragile. The accusations were elegant, economical. My devotion reframed as control, her betrayal reframed as therapy. I called Daniel Harper not because I wanted a courtroom, but because my lungs had forgotten their instructions. We'd gone to the same state university. He had a map where other people had cliffs. I sat in his office and told the story without adjectives. He listened, then drew a small square on his legal pad. Document everything, he said. Don't react, prepare. If she moves the goalposts, make her drag them across tape. I bought a cheap notebook on the way home, the kind with a cardboard cover that makes a clean sound when it opens. I wrote dates. I copied sentences verbatim. I took screenshots of her text where concern became control at the comma. Claire came in from yoga, kissed my hair, told me I looked handsome when I was focused. I closed the notebook. At dinner, we ate standing at the counter because chairs were too slow. She tasted the sauce like an editor marks a paragraph, pronounced it brave, then rejected counseling as a referee I've outgrown. She had done the hard work, she said. I needed to catch up. When I suggested a neutral therapist to name what survival had done to desire, she called it a patriarchal pause button. Trust the process, she said, and smiled like a teacher rewarding a near-correct answer. Thursday, she cried because the world kept asking her to justify her joy. When I handed her a tissue, she accused me of trying to fix her feelings. "Witness, don't repair," she said. Her phone lit with messages from new circles, names without surnames, plans phrased as urgencies. She kept the screen angled away, a small geometry that admitted more than any confession would have. Daniel texted a list that sounded cold until it sounded wise. Photograph the state of the house. Back up statements, move nothing, confront no one. I filmed the jewelry dish by the sink, the drawer with passports, the envelope of titles, the laptop serial numbers. I spoke the date and time into the camera like a spell against revision. At night, silence hummed with ultimatums. She sent me a podcast about desire after illness, bright music over tidy sentences, erotic autonomy, post-traumatic expansion. I understood the story it handed her, protagonist regained. I also understood the role it handed me, antagonist of her becoming. I stopped arguing with the script. The more I chose quiet, the more she mistook it for consent. "I'm proud of you," she said, patting my shoulder as if I were finally a good student. "You're leaning into discomfort." She praised my growth the way people praise a plant for reaching the light you moved it toward. Friday morning, she offered a compromise that wasn't one. "Let's pause the legal tone and return to love," she texted, attaching a photo of tea steam like a stock image for calm. By noon, a different tone. "If you say no, you prove my point about control." By evening, kindness again, rounded edges, an emoji to cushion it. A choreography of grief, guilt, and gaslight, step, turn, bow. I wrote without heat. Times, phrases, a copy of her line about consent under duress isn't consent, reclaimed now to excuse doing what she had already decided to do. I printed a single page from Daniel, preservation letters ready, discovery later, patience always. Belief is not a plan, he'd said. Paper is. That night, the apartment felt like a stage set after the audience has gone home, props in place, air exhausted, lights cooling. Claire scrolled flights she wouldn't need, confirmed a reservation at a bar that promised curated nostalgia, checked the weather like the sky should cooperate with her narrative. When I asked who would be there, she swept her hand. "A mix. Details are noise." I thought of the hospital chair, of broth cooling on a tray, of the way she had squeezed my hand when the surgeon walked in, the squeeze that believed in both fate and effort, and tried to reconcile that woman with the one booking a boutique hotel 3 blocks from a goodbye party. My mind could not bend that far without breaking. In bed, I counted breaths like coins. If she came home at dawn with apologies shaped like insight, or at noon with bullet point rationalizations, the fact would remain. She had asked for permission to injure me and called it love's graduation. I lay there until the ceiling blurred and accepted the only sentence that opened anything. I would not chase or plead or perform. I would be ready. When morning came, nothing in the apartment had moved, except me. Saturday arrived pretending to be ordinary. The dishwasher ticked in its sleep. Basil reached for a square of light on the kitchen sill. Claire stepped out in the dress she kept for photographs, checked her reflection in the microwave door, kissed my cheek like signing a receipt. "I'll text when I leave the bar," she said, kind the way people are when they've already chosen. Then the door closed with its usual soft catch, as if nothing in the world had changed. I put on the coat I saved for serious rain, took the umbrella I didn't plan to open, and drove downtown. 2 blocks from the bar, I sat on a metal bench that teaches you where your bones are and watched the city gather itself. Her text came on time, leaving for the bar, talk later, and landed like a pre-written card. Inside, laughter rose and fell in carbonated waves. Outside, strangers smoked under the awning and checked their teeth in their phones. When the party broke, people spilled to the sidewalk in clumps. Goodbyes arranged themselves by importance, long hugs for the inner circle, quick handshakes for the rest. A man soaked more attention than the others, not the rival my imagination had sketched, but short, thick through the middle, a suit the color people call navy to avoid saying blue. When he laughed, he folded like a closing book. Marcus, I thought, and felt my body register the insult of ordinariness. Claire appeared last, because she always had a way with timing. She paused in the doorway for 3 beats, as if letting the night notice her. Then her eyes found him. Something in her posture released, shoulders settling into a shape I recognized from long before I knew its price. She stepped into the rain with a small laugh for the weather and slid her hand into his as easily as removing a ring. They didn't hurry. People who believe they are doing something brave rarely do. At the corner, they waited for the light, and she said something that made him tip his head back. I discovered I could hate the shape a stranger's throat makes when he swallows. When they crossed, I stood and followed at a distance that would read as coincidence on a police report. It wasn't a chase. It was the sort of walk people take when they are thinking about dessert. The hotel was 3 blocks of polished neutrality, plants too clean to be alive, a desk clerk with a smile ironed smooth by training. The lighting set warm to flatter regret. I stopped beneath a street lamp outside and watched the doors inhale them. The elevator arrived, opened its quiet mouth, and swallowed the rest. I could see the scene my pride wanted. The lobby speech, the room number demanded like a debt collected in years, the hallway where my heart rehearsed lines and my mouth dropped them. I could see myself knocking, then learning what every man who knocks learns. There is no sentence that can undo a lie already in motion. Theater was available. Dignity cost extra. Rain makes you honest. It took away the gestures that require flourish. I closed the umbrella and let the water have me. Taxis blinked their sleepy eyes. Couples draped themselves over each other like excuses. Somewhere above me, 2 people practiced a story they would rename tomorrow. If I said betrayal out loud, the word would have bounced off the glass and come back unchanged. What held me there wasn't shock. Tuesday had spent that. What held me was proof settling into bone. Whether she returned at dawn with apologies carved into insight or at noon with bullet point rationalizations, the marriage had already stepped from promise into evidence. Given the politest exit, she had chosen it. Facts don't respond to poetry. I thought of the hospital chair, the broth cooling on a tray, the squeeze of her hand when the surgeon walked in, the kind of squeeze that believes in both fate and effort. I had made a vocation of catching her when she jumped. Lately, she hadn't looked down to see if I was where I had promised to be. Under the hotel awning, I accepted that second chances mean very little when the first one wasn't spent. Time stretched, then snapped. A horn somewhere made the sound of a decision. I turned from the revolving doors, walked back through rain that felt earned, and drove home with the wipers writing and unwriting the same sentence across the windshield. At a red light, I pictured the key turning at dawn, the apology shaped like insight, the fragile question, do you still love me enough to respect a life I will not? I let the thought pass like a siren. By the time I reached our street, the rain had softened into drizzle, the kind movies romanticize in cities they don't live in. The apartment windows glowed their loyal glow. Inside, I hung my coat, stood in the doorway of our room, and felt the quiet thicken into its new size. Objects are faithful in ways people can't manage. The bed was made. The books were where we left them. Somewhere down the hall, a zipper would close later. I spread a towel on the couch so I wouldn't ruin the cushions and lay down facing the door, not to catch her, but to choose my own exit when morning came. The sentence that ended the night was simple enough to hold. She had chosen her door. I would choose mine, and I would choose it quietly. The city was mostly empty on my drive home, streets reflecting traffic lights back at themselves like they were practicing mourning. I stopped at a hardware store that glowed with late-shift fluorescence and bought a brass deadbolt because it looked like a decision. In the bedroom, the pillows sat obedient. The book on her nightstand rested face down where she'd left it. 2 water glasses wore identical rings halfway up. I set the package on the bed, took a breath, and changed the lock. The old screws protested, a thin squeal that sounded like history. The new bolt slid into place with the quiet confidence of a boundary finally taught its job. I turned the key twice, not to test it, but to teach my hand the motion. Then I opened the closet and made choices you can't make gently. Which hanger belonged to whom? Which sweater still smelled like citrus gym soap? Which shoes I remembered carrying to the car while she stood barefoot and triumphant on a sale floor? I moved her things into the guest room and left a note on the dresser, written in my neatest letters. Please find other accommodations soon. Daniel's checklist hummed in my pocket. Document, don't dramatize. I walked the apartment with my phone, speaking date and time into the camera like a spell against revision. Jewelry dish by the sink. Drawer with passports and spare keys. The envelope of paper titles in the desk. Serial numbers on laptops. I filmed the safe open and again closed. I took screenshots of balances, transfers, credit limits. I photographed the car in its space and the odometer's unblinking honesty. Cop is to cloud, cop is to email, nothing moved but air. At 11:02 a.m., a voicemail landed cheerful as small talk. Just checking in. At 11:19, the tone splintered. You're being punitive. At 11:41, a plea that had been rehearsed. Please pick up, we should talk like adults. I listened to two and saved neither. Between them, I labeled the photos, boxed her toiletries so she wouldn't have to rummage, made the guest bed because people sleep better in a bed someone has smoothed on purpose. My hands shook, then didn't. Evening loosened the building. Doors opened and closed. A neighbor laughed down the hall. Somewhere a microwave sang. Her key tried the front door and failed softly. She stepped in, party smile off, hair damp from rain. And her eyes found the new deadbolt, the closed bedroom, the guest room lit like an instruction. Confusion, calculation, then the quick rehearsal of indignation she decided not to use yet. Can we talk? She asked, like adults. I'd already opened the camera and tilted it down to film from waist height, the way Daniel advised, tone not faces. I'm not prepared to discuss anything without counsel present, I said. The sentence stood between us like furniture. This is childish, she said, staring at the lock as if it could be shamed. You're leaving notes and changing hardware. This is clarity, I said. It's what happens when someone makes a choice and names it healing. She didn't argue the timeline, she argued the tone. She tried soft first. We both did things wrong this week, let's not be dramatic. When that slid off, she tried precise. Punishment, overreaction, control. I wrote the words down later exactly as she'd said them, not as charges to answer, but as weather to record. We walked to the guest room. The orderly stack of folded shirts drew a single humorless laugh. You're really doing this, she said to the doorway. I'm really doing this, I said to the quiet. For an hour, she moved through cabinets at a volume that wanted to be a language. I sat on the couch and wrote date, time, phrases. When she paused in the hall, she offered a truce polished to look like wisdom. Let's reset. We're tired. Tomorrow we can start fresh. Resets are for software. I said, not vows. The guest door closed without drama. Silence returned to its full height. Morning arrived like a favor. I made coffee and opened Daniel's email. 3 names, 2 brief assessments, professional, pragmatic, thorough, expensive. Claire emerged with her hair in a knot and a towel on her shoulder. She saw the single mug on the counter, started her own with a focus that announced a boundary. About last night, she said without looking up. We were both. I won't discuss details without counsel, I said. The sentence had fewer tremors now. Practice turns intent into muscle. She gave me a look designed to be archived as proof of my rigidity. I didn't think you were capable of this, she said. I didn't think you were capable of scheduling what you scheduled, I said. Here we are. She left before 9 with a backpack and a list of places to be that did not include me. The apartment settled like dust in good light. I sat at the table and turned the week into a clean log, times, locations, neutral nouns, and attached the photos, the balances, the hallway video. I saved the file in a folder with a number for a name. Numbers don't blush. Then I stood with my palm on the new lock and listened to the nothing on the other side. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was space reclaimed. The refrigerator purred. Water in the pipes cleared its throat. Traffic 4 floors down slid by like a river I did not have to cross yet. The line had been drawn, not with shouting, with hardware, with notes, with documented air. I would not beg for a version of us that no longer respected itself. I would proceed on paper. Daniel Harper's office refused theatrics. No mahogany fortress, no framed triumphs, just a clean desk, a legal pad, morning light that didn't lie. My pulse slowed the second I sat. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want to breathe." "You will," he answered, "but we breathe with a plan." He drew 4 short lines on the pad like compass points. Separate finances, freeze unused credit, adjust beneficiaries where lawful, begin discovery before anyone edits the past. No pep talk, no pity, just verbs. I slid a small stack across, screenshots, my notebook, the hallway video where my voice stayed level and hers called clarity childish. He reads silently, a music teacher counting time. "Good," he said. "Your tone is calm, keep it. Now the unromantic part, money." He listed what to pull as if we were inventorying a house before a storm. Bank statements 18 months, tax returns, large purchases, subscriptions, rewards accounts, hotel loyalty. If it earns points, it leaves footprints. I left with a checklist that felt like oxygen. Back home, I opened tabs like hatches on a ship. Statements, exports, PDF stacking into obedient folders. And then a rhythm appeared where I'd only heard noise. Transfers to a wallet we never used. Cash withdrawals at odd hours near the yoga studio. 2 charges at a hotel bar in a neighborhood she never had a reason to visit. Subscriptions to a meditation app I had never seen on any of our devices. A rideshare at 2:13 a.m. on a Wednesday dropped 3 blocks from our building, the kind of near-home stop that avoids being witnessed. I went further back. Patterns don't mind being found, they wait. Around hospital weeks, the ledger stuttered, then resumed like a song she knew by heart. A boutique with very good windows and very bad returns. Dinners priced like anniversaries that never appeared on our calendar. The points told a story softer than texts and twice as honest. I printed, circled, color-coded with outrage. Cash in yellow, rideshare in blue, bars and hotels in red. I checked the toll transponder, 2 late-night exits I could not account for. I checked our store rewards, points redeemed in a size I didn't wear. I checked the car's odometer against my own mileage and found miles I'd been blaming on memory. I called the bank's robot line and let its indifferent voice read the dates back to me. Indifference can be merciful when truth isn't. By midnight, the dining table had turned archive. I built a binder because order felt like breath. Tabs for statements, transfers, cash, loyalty, rideshare, subscriptions, dining, retail, and one thin section at the back labeled voice, the transcript of Tuesday in the kitchen where she called betrayal kind. I didn't annotate. I didn't editorialize. I let numbers do what they do best, stand. At Daniel's the next morning, Maya, his paralegal with a pencil behind her ear, added tabs I hadn't imagined. Third-party wallets, cloud artifacts. "Shared family plan?" she asked, and within minutes uncovered a ghost line that had lived on our cell account long enough to be financed, then moved off as a bring-your-own device. Not criminal, just careful. The kind of second phone that wants to be forgotten. Metadata turned romance into math. The Thursday cash aligned with the 2:13 a.m. Ride aligned with the hotel bar, aligned with the spontaneous wine thing at the studio. Marcus wasn't a deviation. He was simply the one she wanted permission for. Daniel laid the timeline across the table and marked 2 vertical lines, diagnosis, surgery. The pattern predated both, pauses around the hospital, then the same melody in a brighter key. Something in me cracked in a place anger can't reach. I had been preparing to argue about a single night. The ledger showed a system. "We're not here to moralize," he said. "We translate behavior into facts. Facts become leverage. Leverage becomes outcomes." He wrote one more line, "Don't ambush, build." He outlined the next steps with a steadiness that felt like a hand on my back. Preservation letters to companies that hold our points and rides and rooms. Requests for complete histories where the law allows. A quiet note to the bank about marital instability, not accusation. Close joint cards we don't need. Move half of liquid funds where permitted. Change passwords without trespass. And above all, stop rehearsing speeches for doors that won't open. I nodded because my body finally knew what to do with itself. At home, I finished the map. Cross-references, footnotes, dates on a single clean page titled simply "The Story We Can Prove." I slid it into the binder's front sleeve and felt my jaw unclench. Claire texted then, the choreography intact. "Let's be rational. You moving money is abusive." Then a photo of tea steam, then a softer line about love. I replied only once, all substantive conversations through counsel. When silence followed, it wasn't empty. It was policy. The next morning I placed the binder on Daniel's desk without ceremony. He flipped through, added 2 sticky notes, and closed it with a sound that felt final without being loud. "Good," he said. "Now we keep her from turning this into theater." Walking out, I passed couples in the lobby arguing over parking tickets and brunch. Their noise made my quiet feel expensive. For the first time since Tuesday, I understood what revenge looked like in daylight. Not lobbies, not speeches, paper, signatures, a ledger that doesn't raise its voice. It wasn't a tantrum, it was a map, and I finally knew how to read it. The work wasn't dramatic, it was fluorescent. Maya Daniels, paralegal, hair in a tight knot, pencil tucked behind her ear, spread my binder across the conference table and began adding tabs I hadn't imagined. Rewards, third-party wallets, cloud artifacts. She treated my marriage the way an auditor treats a promising fraud. Assume competence, verify everything. Convenience left the first footprint. Years in the same ecosystem meant our devices overlapped in lazy ways. Shared calendars, a family cloud plan, the occasional automatic backup to a folder with both our initials. In one of those backups, a messaging app had cached user data. Not the messages, just the handle that survived a careless sink like a fossil in soft rock. At LaTeX checkouts, distinctive enough to follow. Maya typed it into loyalty programs, wallet services, reservation sites. Dates began to rhyme. The Thursday cash withdrawals I'd circled. A 2:13 a.m. rideshare that stopped 3 blocks from home. A hotel bar receipt at a property we'd never visited together. Each clustered around nights Claire had stayed after yoga for a spontaneous wine thing. The hall pass was starting to look less like bravery and more like branding. Metadata turned romance into math. Wallet transfers labeled with emojis and private jokes. Reward points earned in bars nowhere near client dinners. A boutique with very good windows and very bad returns on the same evenings. She'd texted me that the studio had run late. I watched the line items fall into a rhythm any drummer would envy. Then the folder no spouse wants to see, screenshots that weren't lurid, just lethal. In a sloppily wiped cloud dump from an old phone, notification previews had survived like half-burned notes. Cropped first names, time-stamps, fragments of sentences, not only Marcus, a T, who loved post-yoga Claire, a dev who sent a whiskey photo caption to our second chances. Marcus wasn't the epic story, he was simply the convenient alibi. Daniel drew 2 vertical marks on a printout, diagnosis, surgery, and let the timeline speak. The pattern predated both, a stutter around the hospital weeks, then a return to form so smooth you could mistake it for healing. Something in me cracked in a place anger can't reach. I had been preparing to argue about a night. The ledger showed a system. We kept building. On our cell plan, a ghost line had appeared and disappeared twice. Financed mid-month, paid down too quickly, then moved off account to bring your own device status. Not criminal, just careful. The kind of second phone that wants to be invisible without getting dirty. We wouldn't get content, we didn't need it. Existence and timing paired with the rest wrote enough. Meyer aligned everything. Cash in yellow, rides in blue, hotels in red, messages as gray shadows between. The map formed itself. A Thursday cluster here, a Monday there, a stretch in Phoenix where no conference had existed wrapping neatly around charges in a town 90 minutes away. My stomach tried to bargain. The paper didn't. "Next steps," Daniel said, voice set to practical. Preservation letters to loyalty programs, wallet services, rideshare companies, hotels, so nothing goes conveniently missing. Requests for complete account histories where we have footing. We refrain from chasing content. Metadata is kinder and often stronger. We document the burner line, note the on/off pattern. We attach the calm hallway audio and the cadence of her text so a mediator who has never met either of us can understand tone. We don't ambush, we build. I nodded the way a body nods when it finally recognizes a language. Back home, the binder grew a new front page with a plainer title than my pride would have chosen, The Pattern We Can Prove. I slid in cross-references, footnotes, a legend for the colors. I backed it up twice, one cloud, one drive labeled with masking tape because unglamorous things are hardest to deny. Claire texted between meetings, still performing serenity. Can we meet and be rational? This is exhausting. Attached, a photo of tea steam trying to pass as peace. I put the phone face down and wrote a line at the bottom of the page in small, steady letters, all substantive conversations through counsel. By late afternoon, the story no longer needed adjectives. It had dates, it had doors, it had receipts that made speeches unnecessary. The one-night request had been a rebrand, not a rupture. She wanted permission for habit, not absolution for accident. Daniel tapped the edge of the binder, then another page I hadn't considered. If Marcus has a spouse, he said, she's living inside the same draft without being allowed to edit. You will reach out calmly, factually. No threats, no theater. Two people carrying one truth is lighter. I sat with that. There was a time I would have called it petty. It felt now like respect, for the record, for myself, for whoever had been turned into an obstacle in somebody else's story. I asked for the guardrails. Daniel gave them, neutral place, measured tone, nothing binding, nothing recorded without consent. When I left the office, the city looked fractionally more legible, as if the street names had been cleaned. The binder was heavy in my hand in the best way. Facts have weight that steadies. On the sidewalk, a couple argued about brunch. A bus sighed. I took out my phone, found a number I had hoped I'd never need, and let it ring. Not to make a scene, to share the ledger, to begin telling the truth in plural. The evidence drew a straight line to one person I hadn't met, Marcus's wife. If I was living in a script I didn't write, she was reading the same pages in a different house. I asked Daniel if reaching out was wise. Be precise, he said. Calm, factual, no threats, no recordings without consent. Offer only what you can prove. Sofia Alvarez answered on the second ring, steady voice, edges dulled by months of bad sleep. I didn't dramatize. I told her my name, Claire's, Marcus's, and that I had dates, statements, and a reason to keep this private. We chose neutral ground, a small riverside park with a coffee cart and benches that made you sit up straight. She arrived early. No armor, no tears, just a simple messenger bag and the posture of someone who had stopped apologizing for taking up space. We shook hands like colleagues, not co-conspirators. I set my binder on the bench and slid it toward her. She opened it without ceremony. The Tuesday voicemail where Claire removed my consent like a sticker. The ledger of cash withdrawals. Ride shares at 2:13 a.m. Loyalty points blooming on nights I'd been told to sleep early. Sophia placed a thinner folder on top, fewer pages, just sharper ones. A hotel bar receipt from a property nowhere near any client dinner. 2 late-night ride shares to a street 3 blocks from our building. A dry cleaning slip annotated Cologne. And an HR coaching memo for Marcus, soft words about mentoring boundaries that said everything by refusing to say it. I'm not here to stage a scene, she said. I'm here to stop living in one. Then she handed me a printout that ended the myth Claire had been selling me. An email forwarded to herself months ago, subject line harmless, off-site, body not so much. Same hotel bar after the team dinner, missed last Thursday. This week will be better. The date sat there like a pin in a map, well before Claire's diagnosis, long before the language of healing and one night. We didn't gloat. We outlined rules on the back of a napkin like adults dividing a project. No public ambushes, no workplace theatrics. Secure finances first. One clean disclosure moment with witnesses who mattered and a record that read as calm. No adjectives, only nouns and dates. If asked, we'd say, we're handling it privately and stop. We would not feed their story by making a spectacle. "You'll tell them?" she asked. "I'll invite family to a private dinner," I said. No shouting. A short audio clip to set tone. The ledger, "Your email last, not first." She nodded. "I'll notify HR through channels. Policy likes quiet." Then she looked at me with a steadiness I recognized. When men like Marcus get caught, they expect melodrama. It flatters their sense of importance. Don't give him that. "I won't," I said. "I'm done performing for them." We traded timelines like professionals. Mine read in columns. Hers read in weather. Thursdays that went missing, Sundays with pharmacy bags, the week he started coming home smelling like a cologne she used to buy. We agreed to keep counsel informed, to document every contact, to let paper do work mouths would only complicate. Before we stood, she forwarded the email to Daniel's secure address. "For the record," she said, "not revenge, record." Back at Daniel's office, I slid the printout across his desk as if it were a scalpel. He read the date, the wink, the subject, and drew a neat box around it. "Predates diagnosis," he murmured. "Pattern, not spiral." That night I booked the private room, honest light, a door that closed without making a point. I asked for the small speaker they kept for toasts, logistics, because Claire respected logistics. I sketched the order on a single page, greeting, 19 seconds of her voicemail, ledger highlights in plastic sleeves, pause. Sophia's email, placed gently like a final exhibit that didn't need narration. This wasn't sabotage, it was a correction. For months, I'd been arguing with smoke, epiphanies, empowerment, adult choices. Paper cleared the room. The alliance with Sophia didn't feel like fate or friendship. It felt like respect for truth, for ourselves, for the clean line a ledger can draw where a speech would only smear. On my way home, I passed the hotel where I'd watched my marriage end. It looked exactly as it had. Plants too polished to be alive, glass murmuring money, an elevator swallowing secrets without ceremony. I didn't slow down. I didn't need to look up. The image that had once pinned me to the sidewalk had been replaced by a better one, two spouses on a bench, trading facts like first aid, refusing to bleed for an audience. At my kitchen table, I rewrote the dinner invitation until it was plain and kind. No hints, no bait, just a time, a place, and the assumption that adults could sit through what they'd rather scroll past. I placed a binder clip on the packet and felt a quiet click inside myself, the sound a life makes when it returns to its hinges. In the morning, Sophia texted a photo of a lemon tree on her balcony. "New apartment," she wrote, "small but mine." I sent back a single line, ledger over theater. She replied with a check mark. We weren't allies because we loved justice. We were allies because we were tired. Tired of being cast as the villains in someone else's redemption arc. Tired of apologies that came stapled to a lesson. Tired of watching language do crimes numbers wouldn't commit. The plan was simple now. Not vengeance, not spectacle. Just truth, walked into a room and set gently on a table. Dinner was supposed to be a gesture of peace. A Sunday roast, the table set the way Melissa liked. Wine glasses catching the dim light, rosemary tucked into the napkin folds, the air heavy with the illusion of home. She smiled as if nothing had burned between us, as if betrayal could be plated beside potatoes and carved beef. But I wasn't here to forgive. I was here to reveal. I'd invited not just her, but her parents, her sister, and most importantly, Daniel's wife, the one woman who deserved the truth as much as I did. When Melissa walked in and saw her, her face cracked for a second like glass under pressure. But she recovered, clinging to her smile. That was her gift, acting like the storm wasn't already inside the house. The clinking of cutlery filled the silence at first. Small talk floated over the table, work, whether her father's health. But my heart hammered against my ribs, steadying itself for the moment that would change everything. Daniel's wife shifted in her seat, her eyes darting toward me. She knew what was coming. We had rehearsed this sting carefully, every detail sharpened to cut clean. Melissa tried to pour me wine. I let her hand hover near the glass before I said calmly, "Maybe pour some truth instead." Her laugh was brittle. "What's that supposed to mean?" I slid the envelope onto the table. Photos, printouts, bank transfers, all evidence of the life she'd been living when she said she was working late or traveling with friends. The room froze, forks hung midair. Her father leaned forward, squinting at the papers. Daniel's wife pushed the knife deeper with her voice. "He's not lying, Melissa. You weren't just cheating him. You were destroying two families." Melissa's mask shattered. Words spilled out, excuses, deflections, gasps of denial. But every page I turned was a nail in the coffin. The burner phones, the hotel receipts, the wire transfers. The table became a courtroom and she was stripped of every defense. Her mother covered her mouth, whispering prayers. Her father's voice cracked into anger. "Is this true?" Melissa sobbed, tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled it away like fire. "You demanded freedom," I said, my voice steady. "Well, here it is, the freedom to explain to your family why everything they believed about you was a lie." The silence after was heavy, almost holy. She was no longer the wife I had married. She was a stranger unraveling before the people whose respect she craved most. Daniel's wife stood, calm and sharp as a blade. "We're done, both of us. You can keep your excuses. We'll keep our dignity." She left, and I followed, the sound of Melissa's sobs fading behind me like a storm retreating over the horizon. The sting wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice in a story she thought she controlled. And that night I learned, the most devastating truths don't need to be shouted. They only need to be placed on the table, where everyone can see them. After the sting at the dinner table, silence followed Melissa like a shadow. Calls went unanswered, texts unread. But behind the quiet, I was moving. Revenge didn't just live in confessions. It thrived in contracts, bank accounts, and signatures inked in cold clarity. If love had once bound us, money was the golden net that kept her tethered. And now I was cutting every strand. I met with my lawyer in a glass office that smelled faintly of paper and power. He slid documents across the table, each one a blade sharpened by law. "She doesn't know the accounts are already frozen," he asked. I shook my head. "Not yet." We exchanged a look the kind men share when justice is finally within reach. Melissa had always believed financial security was her safety net. She liked to tell people, "We're comfortable," as if comfort were a trophy she'd earned. She never mentioned the overtime shifts I'd worked, the second contracts I'd taken, the nights I came home too late to eat. She just basked in the glow of a life I'd built brick by brick. That illusion was about to collapse. The first cut was the joint account. I pulled the ladder from under her feet, leaving only her personal balance, a fraction of what she thought she controlled. The second cut was the credit cards, each one canceled in a clean stroke. The third cut was the house. My lawyer filed the papers that ensured she could not touch it. She had packed her suitcases for weekends away. Now she would learn what it felt like to live without the roof she once took for granted. When she finally called, her voice cracked like a brittle mask. "Why would you do this? You know I need access to those funds." I let the pause stretch long enough for the weight to settle, then said, "You needed honesty more. This is just balance finding its way back." She tried to flip the script, leaning into guilt the way she always had. "After everything I went through, my illness, my recovery, you would leave me with nothing." Her words dripped with practiced fragility, but they no longer worked on me. I had sat too long in that ugly blue hospital chair, believing my sacrifice guaranteed loyalty. I finally understood. Pity is not the same as love, and sacrifice doesn't buy devotion. The day the papers were served, Melissa arrived at my office. She wore her strongest smile, the one she had weaponized for years, but it cracked at the edges when she saw the folder in my hand. "This isn't necessary," she whispered. I laid the documents down, page after page, spelling out the end. "It's not necessary for you anymore," I said. "It's necessary for me." Her signature wavered, but the ink dried just the same. When the final page was sealed, I felt something leave me, an invisible chain snapping loose. For the first time in years, I breathed without the weight of her debts, her lies, her endless demands. As she walked out, I realized this was the true severance, not of finances, but of power. Money had been the last thread she thought she could pull. Now it was gone, and with it her grip on me. Revenge didn't need flames or fury. Sometimes it was clean lines on white paper, cutting deeper than any blade. Melissa had always been a performer. At dinners, at charity events, even in our own living room, she wore charm like a mask that never slipped. People believed in her version of us because she was tireless in rehearsing the lines. But after the financial severance, cracks spread through her stage like spiderweb glass. And this time, no performance could hold. It started with whispers. Friends who once raised glasses in her honor began to lower their voices when she entered the room. At yoga, smiles turned brittle, the kind that hides judgment instead of offering warmth. She told herself they were jealous, but the truth was simpler. The story had changed, and she couldn't control the script anymore. The affair, once her private rebellion, had become public currency. The dinner sting had made sure of that. People replayed the scene like gossip theater, her excuses, my silence, the undeniable fracture. Marcus's name passed through circles like contraband, each retelling sharper than the last, and while she tried to laugh it off, the laughter never echoed back. I watched from a distance, detached but not indifferent. For years, I had been her silent partner in the illusion, smiling on cue, applauding when expected. Now, with my mask gone, I saw how quickly hers began to slip. Without my support, without the scaffolding of us, her stage collapsed. The fallout hit hardest at family gatherings. Her parents, who once praised her resilience, now looked at me with quiet sympathy. Her sister pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "We wondered, but we never thought." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The weight of suspicion had always been there, buried under her sister's radiance. Now it surfaced, undeniable. Melissa tried to reclaim the narrative. She told relatives I had grown cold, that grief had hardened me, that my revenge was crueler than her mistake. But her words no longer landed. Masks only work when the audience agrees to believe. And one by one, her audience stopped clapping. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching someone unravel, even someone who had betrayed me, but there was a strange clarity. For so long, I thought love was the glue that held our lives together. Now I saw it had been perception. Applause that was finally ending. The moment I knew the mask had truly stopped sticking came at a friend's wedding. Melissa arrived alone, shoulders squared like armor, but the room shifted when she walked in. Conversations thinned. A table that once would have waved her over suddenly filled with others' coats. She found a seat near the back, raising her glass with a forced smile. No one raised theirs in return. I saw her then not as my wife, not even as my betrayer, but as a woman stripped of her stage. And for the first time in years, she looked small. Later, as I left, a mutual friend touched my arm. "You're better without the performance," he said. It wasn't advice, it was observation. He was right. When masks stop sticking, the truth finally breathes. If the social fallout stripped Melissa of her audience, the workplace stripped her of her stage altogether. Offices are cruel in their own way. Corporate walls remember everything, even whispers. And in a company where reputations were traded like currency, Melissa's once golden stock began to plummet. It started small. A manager's pause before inviting her into a meeting. An assistant who suddenly became too busy to rearrange her schedule. People weren't cruel. They were careful not to be too close, careful not to look complicit. Rumors had legs, and Melissa was now the one being carried unwillingly on their backs. Then came HR. They don't kick down doors, they send calendar invites. A polite subject line, discussion on policy alignment. Melissa walked in with her usual poise, heels sharp against the tile, ready to perform again. But performance doesn't matter when someone else has the receipts. And I had them. The expense reports, the company credit card charges that never matched her travel logs, the hotel bills tucked neatly between corporate dinners. The patterns were undeniable. Transfers disguised as client reimbursements, miles that didn't match flights, a whole hidden web of betrayal, not just of me, but of the company that trusted her. When HR asked questions, she reached for charm. She smiled, smoothed over timelines, claimed clerical errors. But charm works poorly under fluorescent lights, with policy binders stacked between you and the table. Every smile became evidence of evasion, every excuse another knot tightening. The moment she realized she couldn't talk her way out was almost imperceptible, a flicker in her eyes, a falter in her voice. She asked for water. She never asked for water. Her supervisor's tone shifted from concern to formality. We'll need to conduct a thorough review. That phrase was the corporate equivalent of a sentence being read aloud. Melissa nodded, composed, but her hands betrayed her, clutching the paper cup as if it might anchor her to solid ground. I wasn't in the room, but I didn't need to be. I had already set the stage. The receipts spoke louder than I ever could. When she returned home that night, she didn't rage. She didn't even cry. She sat at the kitchen table, silent, staring at her phone as though waiting for it to ring with news that would undo the day. But no call was coming. The machine had started, and once it starts, it doesn't stop. The fallout was steady, merciless. She was suspended pending review. Her inbox access revoked. Her name removed from a project she once boasted about like it was her child. Within weeks, the walls of her career, built over years of calculated smiles and curated competence, began to crumble. I didn't celebrate. This wasn't about schadenfreude. It was about balance. She had gambled with everything, our marriage, our trust, her work, and believed she could hide the losses. But paper trails don't lie. One evening, as I cleared dishes, she finally broke the silence. "They think I'm dishonest," she whispered. I wanted to tell her that honesty isn't what you say under HR lights, it's the 1,000 choices before that moment, but I said nothing. The silence was louder. By the time the official letter arrived, termination pending investigation, the Melissa the world once applauded was gone. What remained was a woman staring at a closed door, clutching policies she thought she could bend until they snapped. And in the quiet of our home, I realized, masks can slip, but jobs vanish with a single policy violation. And Melissa had just learned both. When the walls finally pressed in, Melissa did what she always did. She tried to rewrite the story. She had once been brilliant at it, spinning half-truths into sympathy, painting chaos as courage, turning her own betrayals into misunderstood sacrifices. But this time her canvas was collapsing, and no one wanted to buy her art anymore. At dinners with the few friends who still agreed to meet her, she leaned forward with the same practiced intensity that used to win hearts. It wasn't an affair, she insisted. It was clarity, a chance to understand myself. Her voice carried the weight of someone who desperately needed the room to nod along, but no one did. The silence after her words grew heavier with each retelling. She tried other scripts. To her family, "He abandoned me emotionally years ago." To her colleagues, the company was looking for a scapegoat. To her mother, "You don't understand what it's like to survive cancer and realize you've been wasting your life." Every version of the story placed her at the center, the misunderstood heroine trapped in an unfair narrative. But people weren't buying it. Not anymore. Social circles had already shifted. Invitations stopped arriving. Group chats grew quieter, her name appearing only when someone wanted to confirm what they'd heard. "Did you see her at the grocery store? She looked different." Sympathy had curdled into curiosity and curiosity into distance. And yet Melissa didn't stop. She cornered acquaintances at yoga classes, catching them with her wide-eyed urgency. "You know how marriages get stale, right? You understand." She said it like a confession, but it was really a demand for validation. People nodded politely, eyes already searching for exits. Her narrative grew frantic, contradictory. In one breath, she was the victim of a cold husband. In another, she was a survivor claiming her right to live freely. In another still, she was the bold woman punished for refusing to conform. But no story held because truth, when cornered, does not splinter into infinite angles. It hardens. I watched from the quiet of my own life, seeing her attempts from a distance. Friends who once defended her now reached out to me, their voices carrying hesitation. "She says you were controlling, but that doesn't match what we saw." Or, "She's telling people HR targeted her unfairly. Is that true?" I didn't need to answer. The documents, the timelines, the silence in her eyes, all of it answered for me. The most painful part wasn't her lies. It was how desperately she needed them. Because without them, she would have to face the unvarnished truth. She had gambled everything and lost. One night she cornered me too. The kitchen light hummed overhead as she leaned across the table. "You know none of this was really my fault," she whispered, voice trembling but defiant. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. The stillness between us spoke louder than any rebuttal. Melissa once believed she could narrate herself into innocence, that words could bend reality the way they once bent people. But a cornered story is just that, a shrinking box, walls closing tighter with every repetition. And in that shrinking box, her voice echoed back at her, the only audience left to believe her. Courtrooms are not built for passion. They are built for order, for language clipped down to what can fit in a file folder. And yet when Melissa walked in, she carried the same performance she'd rehearsed for years, every tilt of the head, every sigh designed for effect. She wore beige, soft makeup, a necklace I hadn't seen in months. It was the costume of someone who wanted the room to see a woman wronged, not a woman exposed. But paper beats performance. The judge wasn't interested in her trembling voice when she said, "I gave everything to this marriage." He was interested in the bank transfers, the burner phone bills, the emails time-stamped against hotel receipts. He was interested in signatures, in records, in numbers that could not be spun into metaphors. Every file my lawyer slid across the polished wood carried more weight than any tear she let fall. Melissa tried anyway. She let her hand linger on the Bible during her oath, glanced at the spectators as though searching for sympathetic eyes. When questioned, she softened her voice, describing me as absent, distant, married more to his job than to me. For a moment, even I wondered if the court might believe her. That was her gift, after all, to take a slice of truth and season it with just enough fiction to make it palatable. But cross-examination is a scalpel. Each time she spoke, another document contradicted her. She claimed she was working late the night of the hotel bill. My lawyer produced the room key log showing Marcus checking in at 7:42 p.m., her card at 8:09. She said she never moved funds without my knowledge. Screenshots of transfers lit up the projector. She insisted our issues were emotional, not physical. Texts, dozens of them, spelled otherwise. Her mask cracked, not in one dramatic moment, but in slow fractures. The courtroom is merciless that way. It doesn't offer her the applause of dinner parties or the polite nods of friends cornered at yoga. Here, there was only silence when her words collapsed under the weight of proof. I sat still, almost too still, my hands folded on the table. Inside me, storms roared, rage, grief, vindication, but I knew this wasn't the place for thunder. This was the place for calm, for letting paper speak louder than wounds. When it was my turn, I didn't perform. I spoke plainly. About unpaid leave, about blue hospital chairs, about cooking meals taped with instructions on the cabinets, about how love can survive cancer but not contempt. I didn't need to embellish. Truth has its own gravity. By the end, Melissa's eyes were glassy, not with the tears of sorrow, but of someone watching her script disintegrate. She tried one last reach, telling the judge that marriage isn't numbers, that loyalty can't be measured in receipts. The room went quiet. And then my lawyer placed one final envelope on the table, a signed statement from Marcus's wife, aligning timelines, corroborating every lie Melissa had told. Paper over performance, silence over spectacle. When the gavel finally struck, it wasn't loud. But in my chest, it echoed like the closing of a vault. What was ours was now divided, not by emotion, not by story, but by record. And in that calm, I realized her greatest weapon had always been her voice, and for the first time it no longer mattered. The silence after the verdict was heavier than the gavel itself. Courtrooms empty quickly, lawyers packing up files, clerks collecting papers, spectators drifting away. But inside me nothing moved. For years my life had been bound to Melissa's orbit, whether by love, by betrayal, or by the long unraveling in between. And now, with a few strokes of a judge's pen, it was officially severed. I walked outside into air that felt strangely new, though it was just another Tuesday sky. The city moved at its usual rhythm, horns, footsteps, chatter spilling from coffee shops. But I moved slower, as if the ground beneath me needed testing before I trusted it again. Freedom is not a parade. It is a quiet street after a storm, littered with branches but open to walk. At first, I mistook emptiness for loneliness. The house was quieter without her playlists echoing through rooms, without the constant scramble of calendars and new hobbies. Yet slowly, I realized that quiet was not absence. It was space. Space to breathe, to think, to exist without performing. I began with small rituals. Mornings, I made coffee without rushing. I let silence linger between sips instead of drowning it with noise. I cooked not because a nutritionist demanded it, but because I wanted to taste something honest. I went for long walks in the evening, tracing streets I had lived near for years but never really seen. In their ordinary corners, cracked sidewalks, a stray cat curled on a porch, I found more truth than in all the rooftop bars and whirlwind flights she once demanded. Rebuilding is not about grand gestures. It's about undoing the reflex to measure your worth against someone else's hunger. I stopped checking my phone for her messages, stopped expecting the sound of keys at the door. I learned that healing isn't a fireworks display. It's a slow return of trust, first in yourself, then in the world around you. Friends asked if I hated her. The truth was more complicated. Hate is still a tether, and I was tired of being tied. I wanted release, not revenge, though the revenge had already written itself in court documents, in reputations lost, in the silence of those who once applauded her. What I sought now was something quieter, a life where my reflection didn't carry her shadow. One night I found the ugly blue hospital chair stored in the garage, the one where I had slept during her recovery. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I sat in it in the dim light and allowed myself to grieve, not for her, but for the man I had been. The man who thought loyalty was unshakable currency, who believed devotion alone could keep love alive. Saying goodbye to him was harder than saying goodbye to her. But in that grief, something softened. I realized survival wasn't just about escaping betrayal. It was about choosing a new ethic for living. Not to follow blindly, not to carry another's chaos as proof of devotion, but to build quietly, steadily, from the inside out. By the time spring arrived, I planted a garden in the yard. The soil fought me hard and stubborn, but green still pushed through. And maybe that was the lesson. Growth doesn't ask for permission. It happens when you make room. For the first time in years, I wasn't rehearsing a story for others. I was writing one for myself. On the morning of the last hearing, my phone lit up with one final message from Melissa. A paragraph of apologies strung together like beads on a frayed thread, followed by the line she must have believed still had power over me. We are meant to be regardless of the situation. Once, I would have clung to those words, desperate to believe they carried salvation. But that man no longer existed. My reply was brief, and it carried the only truth she had ever forced me to learn. Love without respect is a costume. It may dazzle, it may hide, but eventually it slips, revealing the emptiness beneath. In court, the paperwork was read into record. What had once been our life became clauses and signatures. Property divided, accounts closed, ties cut. The language was sterile, almost cold, but it was also final. The judge's gavel fell, not with drama, but with the weight of inevitability. A marriage had ended, not with vows broken in public, but with ink drying quietly on paper. Outside the courthouse, Melissa stopped me. Her voice carried the same fragile edge I had once mistaken for vulnerability. "Will you ever forgive me?" she asked, eyes searching for a door I no longer guarded. Forgiveness, I realized, is not an escape hatch someone else gets to walk through. It is a bridge we build for ourselves, when we are ready, and sometimes that bridge leads only away. I told her gently, forgiveness isn't a door you get to use to skip the storm. It's a path I'll walk alone when I choose, but you don't get to decide it. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just stood there, silent, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up. And I walked on, not hurried, not triumphant, just steady, because walking away was no longer defeat. It was the only victory that mattered. In the weeks after, I stopped trying to narrate my healing to others. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic gestures. Just mornings where the air tasted clean and evenings where silence was no longer an enemy but a companion. I filled notebooks with thoughts, not because anyone would read them, but because writing them anchored me to myself again. The final lesson was simple, though it had taken me years to learn. Sometimes the truest form of strength is not in holding tighter or in striking back harder, but in letting go fully. Walking away with your dignity intact, your boundaries firm, and your heart open to whatever comes next. Melissa had demanded a hall pass, believing freedom was hers to define. But in the end, it was me who stepped into real freedom. Not the borrowed kind, not the reckless kind, but the kind built on respect for myself. And that is how I won. And that's how she demanded a hall pass. But my revenge made her lose everything came to an end. This story is proof that betrayal always carries a price, and sometimes the greatest revenge is simply walking away with your peace intact. But let me ask you, if you were in Ethan's place, would you have forgiven, or would you have left as he did? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with others who enjoy dramatic stories of betrayal and revenge. You've been watching Cheating Stories 7. See you in the next story.